digitaljamsessions.com. Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam session. Today we're joined by Pete from Dubbit, who comes back to us from Dubbit. We're also joined by Lee from Microsoft, and we have with us Cece from Meta. Hello guys.
Hi.
Hello.
Welcome. So we're going to go round the group here and have a quick introduction as to who's who and who does what. I'm going to start with you, Lee, because you're the most recent person who's already been on before. So if you'd like to explain very briefly what it is you do at Microsoft, that would be lovely.
Hi everyone, so I'm Lee Stott. I'm a technical evangelist at Microsoft. So what is a technical evangelist? It's somebody who helps people use the Microsoft platform and technologies. So I work with lots of developers, game developers, and mainly around building content for the Windows platform. So that's from Windows Phone, Windows desktops, Xbox One, and our cloud services.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lee. And Pete, why don't you explain to our listeners again exactly what you do at Dubbit?
Hello, yes, I'm Pete Robinson. I head up the research team at Dubbit. So Dubbit are a research and digital agency. So we as well as kind of building games like PBS Kids and other such companies, we also spend a lot of time talking to kids, finding out how they're consuming media, how that's changing, and what that means for our clients, which range from Nickelodeon through to new media companies like Hopster.
Wonderful, thank you. And Cece, why don't you explain to us a little bit more about Meta?
Great. Yes. So I'm one of the co-founders of Meta, and Meta is a virtual reality and 360 video platform for mobile devices. So we focus on the Samsung Gear VR, and we're also building mobile apps for Android and iOS. And by virtual reality video platform, I mean we support any form of 360 or VR video with a focus on live action. And specifically, we're interested in UGC videos. So as opposed to premium high production value videos, we're interested in the kind of 360 content you can make with cheap consumer devices.
So slightly more YouTube-esque. Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. And today's conversation stems from an original conversation that Pete and I have had on many, many occasions now. But we're going to revisit this one, and that is to focus on the future of this youth media consumption habits and exactly what the technologies and formats are that we think are going to be important in leading the way for this new digital generation. Now, I'm interested from your perspective, Lee. Obviously, you're dealing with a lot of technology over there at Microsoft, and primarily you're dealing with mobile. So from your perspective, what are you seeing as being the emergent technology formats that are most important for young people when it comes to the Microsoft family?
Okay, yeah, interesting question. I think the key ones for us generally is around video. So the way the new younger generation are consuming data. So I think, anybody who's got children in the household will see this from, the transition of devices, as I call it. So they'll move between different states of devices depending on where they are in the home and what they're doing. And again, it's about multi-use of devices. So somebody playing on an Xbox consuming content within different windows on that device. And again, also using mobile companions along at the same time. So I think video is definitely the primary method, and, lots of academics will cite students don't read and people aren't reading as much as they used to, but I think it's a new way of learning. So I think video is still very key. And again, video with immersive overlays, I think is going to be key. And that feeds very much into the VR and the way we're going with augmented reality in the future.
Okay. So I know, Pete, that you've done a lot of research in this particular space, but you also have a VR portal as well, right?
Yes, so we have a website called We&rsquo, which is essentially just an app store for kind of virtual reality content on mobile and other device. It's getting a lot of traffic, so it's definitely an area where we're seeing kind of a real growth in interest, and we also track that, so track kind of virtual reality in our kind of surveys with audiences, and it's something which visibly is definitely getting busier.
Do you think it's something that this young generation are on board with, or do you think it's still more of a PR story at this stage?
So to begin with, I wasn't a complete believer of it, but over time, and we've run a lot of tests with kids of different ages and with parents and families, it's definitely something that they're fascinated by. I think just how immersive it is, and also as the interactivity within the experience grows as well, it just appears to be getting more and more engaging to this audience. So I now believe.
You've been converted. And so I suppose, Cece, from your experience as a platform, Do you feel that, I don't know if the word ageist is necessarily right here, but do you think it is something for the younger generation that more younger people are the ones that are necessarily tagging on to this thing?
Absolutely. I think young people are naturally drawn to the immersive nature of VR, but I think they are actually pretty picky. So I think the younger generation will be the ones that really drive the quality, not just of content, but of storytelling. You know, younger audiences are really looking to find creators who they want to watch regularly, who they want to kind of build a relationship with over time, which is something that we're not really seeing yet from many VR outlets. And that's why we're focusing at Meta on this UGC regular creation that younger people can watch regularly and, you know, explore the world through someone else's eyes, not just explore the world and see a great 360 shot of a landscape.
I completely understand what it is you're saying. I find this really interesting because it is kind of a bit of a reflection on this whole self-publishing individual brand approach to YouTube and this YouTuber's approach to the economy. So from your perspective, Pete, when we're talking about what this new generation of digital natives are doing, I think one of the things that we hear an awful lot about is this multi-screening thing. And I'm interested to hear from your perspective what you think the reality of that is going to be in the context of things like VR or AR, for example, in terms of the fact that obviously there is a proponent of VR and AR that happens on a mobile device. And obviously there is an awful lot of activity that does happen with that mobile screen for a young person. So I'm interested to hear from your perspective just how you think that's going to impact the usage of second or third or fourth screen.
Yeah, so I'll probably answer this from obviously an audience perspective rather than a technical perspective, because I think it's still the VR thing when we've tested with kids. Interestingly, never mind a kind of a multi-screening thing, a multi-usage. As a multi-usage experience is really interesting, because when we test it with younger kids, for example, they find it quite an alien experience. They enjoy it, they love it, the same way they would love a games console. Some of the things they struggle with are the fact they've been taking out the real world, and this immersive experience is so immersive that it feels a little odd to them. We've had kids suggest that they would like kind of real world controllers, so something to anchor them into the real world as well. So whilst they're in this virtual experience, perhaps they would be holding a toy. And a toy, for example, could be a teddy bear that they walk through a world with, and the teddy bear's there with them, but also holding a hand in the real world, which I think is like a really nice concept. So there's, as well as multi-screening, there's that kind of perspective. We are seeing now kids on average using, you know, up to 7 devices, 7 screens a day, and in some markets a lot more. And when we look at media consumption, it becomes increasingly hard to kind of digest that. How VR fits into that is going to be really, really interesting, because it's going to have to, because it's so immersive, it's going to have to take something else's time, which is always interesting with new technology. So it's going to have to be better than something else from an audience's perspective. And that, I think, is the interesting thing to see what it replaces over the next 18 months. I don't see it right now, because I haven't seen the technology, it being a complementary experience to something else. I think it could, you know, sit within social media, and I think it could sit within gaming. But I think when you're plugged into VR, you're in VR.
Do you think it can be educational though? Because that's what I was going to maybe ask you about, Cece, in terms of, do you think that there is an educational value here in terms of what VR can deliver?
I think absolutely. What we see with younger audiences is this insatiable curiosity in what's happening in the lives of their peers in particular. So the way the Meta interface is set up on the Samsung Gear VR is that it's a world map. We didn't do that so that it kind of looked like an education product, but certainly it gives this really acute sense of exploring the world. So we have hotspots all over the map that glow, and we initially thought people would be drawn to LA, a place in America they're familiar with, but actually they head straight for places they haven't been. So we have a Cambodia video that's extremely popular. So I see a great opportunity for young people to learn about the world in a way that feels totally natural, in a very subtle, immersive way.
And Lee, from your perspective, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts and your kind of insights on this whole UGC approach to something like VR, because I think a lot of people have been going at it from the other end of the spectrum in terms of branded content and you know, kind of big tentpole experiences. What's your take on it?
I think it's really interesting. So we've got quite a lot of experience in the VR space within Microsoft, and more importantly within the UK Microsoft.
Just a bit,
just a little bit. And So, everybody wants to talk about HoloLens, but I'm not going to talk about that yet.
Did I ask you that?
Yeah. No. You always ask me that question every time I see you. Some of the great examples where we've seen huge growth in this is we've got a very young startup in the UK called Visor. So it's VSIR.com, who are actually Microsoft Ventures alumni. So they went through our Ventures Accelerator and they're building cardboard, Google Cardboard, Visor materials. But what's really interesting about what their approach has been, it's about customization of the cardboard design. So they've built various different SKUs and you can customize the visor in your branding. And, Lucasfilms used them for the Star Wars launch. So they're doing extremely well. They're doing all these customized branded ranges, but we're seeing it very much from this number one standpoint of commercial quality experiences for a specific thing, whether it's a premiere, whether it's the launch of the Tank Museum, whether it's, more activity, so a concert, for example. But again, we're seeing so much more activity happening from the UGC perspective, using tools like Alps and Fibrum. But what we're seeing there is a huge issue from a consumer basis of quality. After, not quality in terms of what they're building, but in terms of quality on the devices, because a lot of this software is dependent on the vendor. So whether it be Unity or other development teams and their SDKs that are available. So one of the big issues at the moment that we've seen is the whole support of sensors. And when I say that, a lot of the VR developers are still relying upon Unity or the middleware, providing that sensor level interaction with the user. So you end up with motion blur or distortion rather than using these amazing devices we all carry around in our pockets today, which have gyros and accelerometers built into them. And, so I think there's going to be a huge transition over the next 6 to 8 months. I think it's going to be pretty fast in that quality level being made available to UGC developers, because these new tool sets will come online which will allow this higher quality.
So I'm curious then, from the perspective of UGC content, and this is one of those questions that I'm not quite sure that we've got an answer to yet, but if, for example, you have a bunch of people going to a concert and they're all recording using their mobile devices or, their Lucid Cam or whatever it is that they're using to record 180 or 360, and then they're posting this to wherever, whether it's YouTube or, Meta or wherever else, what happens when we get to the stage of corporate copyright and IP protection when it comes to people recording in 360? Because I don't think that's covered yet, is it?
It's a really good question. I had a conversation yesterday with some people in the sports business, and there aren't that great answers yet out there, which I think will be huge going ahead. So right now, the way that it works, there's a couple of really good companies out there. Vertify is one, VRTIFY, who are reaching agreements and being asked to come to concerts to film in high quality. But definitely, I think we'll see a similar pattern to the early days of mobile video, where initially people might try to defend their property, but initially for the first few years, it will only be shorter clips of these immersive experiences like concerts and sports games that ordinary people can capture anyway, which I think hopefully concert venues and sports teams will see as free promotion. It's an opportunity to see what it's like to be there. So I'm really hoping that's the way that it will go, which currently in the conversations I've been having, people are very enthusiastic about any kind of 360 or VR recording of their event they can get. So hopefully it'll be a good relationship and have good vibes going ahead.
Okay. Pete, I'm curious from your perspective, with young content creators and kind of under 13s or U13 UGC content creators, whether or not you think that this is going to be a trend for these new and emerging kind of formats such as VR and AR. Do you think it's going to be a thing for under 13s?
It has to be. It has to be a thing because it's a thing already on the platforms they're using already.
Yeah.
So I can't see how it won't be. I think there's interesting generational shifts in that. If you look at, I don't know, let's say like a plus 16, there's no hardline generation, even maybe a plus 21 generation. There's a lot of social media that allows people to put up polished imagery and enhance the experience of themselves on social media. What I really like about under 13s and why this sort of technology might work really well is that there's less of a need for polish, and there's more of a need for experience and portraying experience. I think that's a really nice trend when you look at under 13s, which is less social media me and more just what's going on, and getting it out there. So I think they work together. I don't know, but I think so.
Okay. Interesting. So from your perspective, Pete, what do you think is going to be the kind of emergent format for this digital generation? Do you think it's going to be more of an AR thing than necessarily a VR thing, or do you think it's going to be something entirely new?
I think VR is going to be pretty big. I don't know how quickly it's going to be big, but I think the accessibility that, as Lee was talking about, the mobile devices, I think the fact that they're doing cooler things in that space feels like it's straight into the kids' hands. They can start using it now. I think the experiences are varied enough where there's something for everyone. So that seems right. And I also think that there's enough brands spending money on it that it's going to accelerate pretty quickly. So I think VR is going to be huge. If it's 6 months, I don't know, or a year, but I think for this age, it's going to be very, very interesting.
Okay. So, Lee, I have a curveball to throw at you, and it's this, which is that in the world of VR as we know it, there are people who talk about true VR and 360. And there are some people who don't really think that 360 necessarily counts, if that makes sense. And I'm curious from your perspective, do you think that that is going to be a significant factor for the adoption of VR going forwards? Because this idea that everybody's going to put an Oculus Rift on their head, or everybody's going to put Morpheus or, whatever the device is on their head and going to instantly become a mainstream thing, versus actually the majority of people are probably going to experience VR for the first time, 360 VR at least, on a mobile device. And that will be their understanding of what VR is 360. Do you think that that's going to be a problem for the industry going forwards?
Right, yes. I don't think it's going to be a problem as such. I think we're going to have this split of verticals, and I think everybody saw that with the release of the Rift's $500-$600 price point, when everybody's oh my god, that's so expensive. I think people in the industry are like, oh my god, that's so cheap, rather than that it's so expensive. But I think it's aimed at different verticals. So I think the big challenges I see happening is the Morpheus and Rift, what I would say are prosumer devices, and they will either be for a specific insulated experience, and I think this is a key word still, is insulated, because it will be somebody putting on this device and being very much one-to-one with the environment. You can't invite your mates over for a beer and wear a Rift.
unless you want to be really antagonistic, but yeah.
And I think that's going to be very specific, but I can see huge applications in that, and I think it's more around the industrialization of that technology. So let's take, a high-class architect who's designing £1, £2, £3 million properties, and the ability to bring potential clients or guests into that building and look at that environment, which you can say is very old school, that's been happening. But then if you blur that with a 360 experience, and, they can visualize that and be a bit more immersive in that, I think there's a huge opportunity. And I think then there's the whole consumer bracket, where I think cardboard is going to be their first experience. And again, it's becoming of that experience where will we be seeing more and more cardboard become available? A university up north about 3 weeks ago did their university open day at the campus, and they did a VR experience at that campus. And they gave every single person who was attending that university open day a VR headset. They asked them to take the phones out and download the app from the app stores, which, they had the app on all the app stores. Again, that's about making sure you do support all the different platforms. But again, it created a different environment for the open day. So you had all these people sat in this lecture theatre using cardboards.
Okay.
And it changed the whole dynamic of that environment. I thought it was amazing how they did it. And I've never seen technology used like that before in that audience. But the feedback was amazing.
But do you think it's just a kind of a fad? Do you think it's just because it's cool right now?
Yeah, and I think that's technology, isn't it? There'll always be the cool thing, and what will be the next cool thing. And I think it's not necessarily the technology; it's the application of that technology.
So, Cece, from your perspective, what do you think is going to be the interesting application for VR? From your perspective, you're talking about UGC content creation, but do you think there is particularly promise or value in a particular genre industry at this point in time?
I think certainly a lot of people focus on travel as an experience and a genre that will take off very, very quickly. But I think I prefer to think about it in terms of innovation, in terms of what formats will take off. I mean, in the early days of YouTube, people might not have predicted that YouTube videos would be taking up 20% of all video bandwidth online, or whatever the statistic is. I think that we'll be very, very surprised. And this is why it's so exciting working with creators working, out there on their own, exploring this new medium. And I think that part of the innovation will actually happen from the bottom up, which is a controversial perspective. I think, on that note, I was actually at Roblox yesterday, which I'm sure you guys might know about. It focuses on, user-generated 3D games, and they're now beginning to explore virtual reality. They had a few tests running yesterday. And, a lot of young people on the Roblox platform create entirely new games from scratch, just out of their imaginations. And for instance, they've seen the world of, online 3D games for young people totally transformed just by the creativity of the young people who use the platform. And so I'm actually betting on users themselves coming up with quite a lot of interesting applications. I get emails every day from people with new ideas, crazy videos inside people's mouths, putting cameras inside fridges, all those kind of things. And I think it's a very exciting time, and that the transition, I think, will come when creating this content, whether or not that's graphically with something like Roblox, or even kids learning to use Unity, will come, or whether or not it's because 360 and VR cameras become truly consumer and high quality. The innovation and inflection point will come around when creation becomes much more available and accessible. So that's what I'm really looking forward to.
Okay, interesting. So from your perspective, Pete, I'm going to ask you, what do you think is going to be the most significant change that's going to happen maybe in the next 5 to 10 years that's going to change the face of your industry specifically and the way that you do business?
So I guess moving away from VR a little bit, I think one of the big things that's going to change our audience experience and our clients is discoverability. And I think, if you look at preschool, for example, at the moment, parents almost don't know where their kids should be consuming content. It's hard to find. This content that sits across all platforms, across all different providers, across all platforms. And I think that will get smarter. One of the things that we're seeing that we've been testing a lot with is kind of voice recognition as well. And that's getting a lot better with, likes of Microsoft and Google. And we're starting to see, kids actually use that to discover new content, and actually use it before we go and test it with them, which is always quite cool. For me, that's the big change, and that's a big focus of us at the moment, which is how do you help make things easy to discover when everything's fragmented?
An interesting question, because there is so much content out there and so much happening out there that I'm still astounded by the fact that kids can find anything these days. But Lee, what's your take on this? And by the way, let's not say VR. So
yeah. So I wasn't going to say VR. So I think it's around data. I think we're all very much coming to this point that, to get any of these services to work, it's about how people interact with that data. So, things like machine learning, things like voice recognition, things like suggestion and prompting and queuing, I think are going to be very, very important based on machine learning algorithms. So, we're going to be able to learn and understand how people interact with scenes, with gestures, with activities, to then prompt them with useful information, whether it's, tutorial based, if you're trying to do X, Y, and Z. Somebody's already done X, Y, and Z, so it might give you a simple hint, or whether it's actually understanding you as an individual consumer and what your habits are like. So I think data is probably still gold within the commercial environments.
Okay, so just adding on to that, I'm curious to hear from you. What's your take on the future of artificial intelligence or AI?
We've had this debate, I'm sure, many a times, actually.
We have. We just never recorded it, so I'm getting on record. Come on.
So I think, AI is becoming more and more around us every day. We've all we all sit in cars which read our emails to us, and and it's becoming transparent. And I think this is becoming more and more transparent to school children. So if you take the average life of a child now, everything is digital that they're interacting with. And I think AI will become a big basis to the way people will generally live their lives, whether it's from searching for content, looking for things, looking for prompts and help, doing that search of that assignment. I think will all come down very much to being AI driven in the future, and that ability to be able to manage things around us. And I think that's where I see lots of excitement in the AI area now, is that management of my time and making me more effective.
But I am curious, when we talk about this young generation who are going to be surrounded by artificial intelligence and things essentially thinking for them and doing, small tasks for them, do you ever have a concern about the notion that actually the next generation or two down the line is going to become a little bit less innovative and less creative, because they are kind of getting everything served to them before they really anticipate that they need it?
So I think that's a big key that as Microsoft we're trying to really focus with the Microsoft Imagine brand, which is all around trying to get people to, well, students specifically, to turn that light bulb on. So start to question things. How is this built? How is it done? It's not just a device I consume on. It has all this technology behind it. So I think what we're seeing is how things are making it very much more easy. So we released a service called Project Oxford, which can do things like picture sentiment, text analysis. So it's a machine learning algorithm, but from a consumer perspective, it's very simple to plug into that to then analyze what something is or what something is doing. So I think we're trying to make technology easier, but continually reinforce that question of, why are we doing this? And I think that's going to be key to all the services we offer, is the privacy. What are those privacy constraints? What are people willing to divulge, not willing to divulge? Because again, a system only knows as much as you tell it.
Okay. And Cece, what about you? From your perspective, what are you thinking will be that significant change in the next 5 to 10 years?
So I think even stepping away from VR, I think it will be the further democratization of creation tools. So I think all of us probably can remember being about 11, 12, and making our first websites, exploring what it was like online, using sandbox tools and so on. And I think now we're at a stage where there's just beginning to be tools that will help particularly younger people create apps and online experiences. And I'm totally inspired by the creativity of young people. And I think as more and more companies and startups begin to focus on tools to liberate their creativity so that people can make better experiences, or I actually like the point made earlier about how younger generations don't, particularly under 13, don't even care about the high polish, but just want to create something really awesome. Begin to unleash that creativity. So on the VR side in particular, or 360 video side, I think a big specific change will be when the first mainstream smartphone with a 360 camera built in is released. And actually at CES, one was already released called the Sphera, announced. That's the YEZZ Sphera, SFERA, which is coming out in April and is now available for pre-order. So I think that would be a big shift, specifically in the world of 360 video. And I'm really excited to see what companies like Roblox and other online platforms that are making it very, very easy for young people to create games, interactive experiences will do. I think the last 10 years have kind of been the age of the selfie, where younger generations have got increasingly good at creating their social media presence. And I look forward to the moment when the tools are out there that it can be a shift from just honing and developing social media presence to honing and developing the ability to create amazing experiences for other people to enjoy. So that's what I'm really looking forward to. Okay. And there's a lot of work happening on that front already. So yeah, I guess the key word there is creation. That's
very interesting that you should say this, because I was at an event earlier on this week, at a launch of a new organisation called the World Youth Organisation. Shout out to Kieran. And I was mildly stunned and surprised when they had as one of their speakers the CEO of a company called Alex Technologies. And this young man, Alex, did his speech, was very put together, in his black tie, formal event. And towards the end, it was revealed that the young man was actually 14 years old.
Wow.
And he's taken that step from not just, experimenting with coding and technology, but actually to create a company, a profitable company that's building things. And his workforce is global. He has other young people, other teenagers working for him around the world to build apps and games and to create this content. So I think we are getting to that stage, and we are getting to that point where actually young people are being facilitated with the right tools and the right technology to allow them to be able to do that kind of thing. But guys, I want to thank you all for joining us on this digital jam session. And normally what we would ask you is to let us know what your social media handle of choice is, so that our listeners can follow you and find out a bit more about what you're up to. And I'm going to start with you, Pete.
My social media choice is Twitter, and it's at Peter Robinson 81.
Wonderful, thank you. And Lee?
So again, it's Twitter, and my name is at Lee_Stott, STOTT.
Wonderful, thank you. And Cece, what would be yours?
Twitter for me as well. So we are at Meta VR, and that's Meta with 2 T's, METTA VR. Or my personal handle is at CC Metropolis, CECI Metropolis.
Wonderful. And thank you very much for joining us, guys. And thank you for listening. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe and review. And thanks again for joining us on this Digital Jam session. DigitalJamSessions.com